Hi there, Bishop Craig Bergland coming to you with another video blog. Happy New Year. You know, it may seem kind of strange that I'm coming to you on the 2nd of January, a time when most of us are thinking about New Year's resolutions, about what's going to be different about this year, about progress we might make in areas that normally we struggle in, whether we've resolved to lose that extra 5 pounds or perhaps learn a new skill or be better at something we do, pick up a new hobby, whatever it is. This is the time of year when we most often think about something new and positive. We don't get a little jaded and disappointed for a couple months yet. But after a conversation I had on the internet last night, I thought it was important that we also begin this year talking about something that's common to each and every one of us. It's not necessarily a very pleasant topic, but it's a real topic. And the topic is grief and loss. I inadvertently came across some people last night who are stuck in a very unhealthy grieving process around a death a few years ago that had some prominence nationally. It's not important which death it was or what the circumstances were. But one of the family members is surrounded by who I'm sure are a number of well-meaning friends, probably relatives, and rather than encouraging this person to move through the grief process, what they're actually doing is enabling this person to remain stuck. Why do I say that? Well, you know, we all experience losses of various types, and we'll all experience losses this year. In fact, if you really want to look at it technically, we've all lost things already. Every cell in our body is renewed several times a year. We've probably all used the restroom at least once, and our body has cleansed itself of some waste. And yet, of course, we don't look at those kind of losses as being really either particularly good or bad. They're a natural part of life. Throughout the course of this year, some of you will either yourselves or have people you know graduate from high school or college. They'll lose their collection of friends and acquaintances that they've been traveling through life with up to this point. And the good news is that a new collection of friends and acquaintances, and some carryovers from the old, will join them for their journey from here on. But nevertheless, it's a loss and it's a change. Some of you will unfortunately lose your job. Others of you will quit your job because you found a better one, or one you think you like more. And even that is a loss as we lose our former coworkers. We may not have liked all of them, but they're still not going to be involved in our lives to the extent that they were, and that can be a struggle. Some of us will move, and even though we may choose to move, we still have lost our old home, our old neighbors. On a more personal level, some of us will have health challenges, no doubt. We may lose some of our mobility, at least temporarily. We may even lose some of our ability, at least temporarily. Some of those things will recover, some of us won't. And of course, some of us will die, and others of us will know people who die, and will mourn their loss and our prospects of carrying on without them. But as we mourn these things, and as we grieve, it's important to acknowledge two things about grief. One is that it's a process. One doesn't just decide to start grieving today and then finish tomorrow. People who believe that's what they're doing are really just repressing their feelings, not engaging the grieving process. And in fact, if that's what you choose to do, you will grieve one day. It will probably hit you like a ton of bricks, coming from a place you least expected, at a time when you least feel like doing it. But it's going to come, I promise you that. And so it's much healthier to cope with the grieving process now. The second important thing to note is that grieving is a process. And I know that's the same as the first, but I mean that in a different way. We move through it. Now, depending on what kind of loss you're grieving, whether it's a personal loss of mobility or ability, the loss of a job, the loss of a friendship or a romantic relationship, or a death, and depending on how close to you the person, if it's a person that you're losing, whether via the end of a friendship or relationship or by death, or whether it's some value that you had that you're losing, depending on how close to you those things or people were, and how important to you those things or people were, it's going to take a while to grieve. And there is no good time limit. Except I'd like to say this. There are things that we do, unfortunately, or can do, when we're grieving, that extenuate the grief, that extend it and get us stuck. I've certainly known of people who have lost a spouse or a partner who keep their room exactly as it was, who every day drive to the graveyard and sit with them at lunchtime. Let me say, as a person of faith, I believe in driving to the graveyard. You're not sitting with them. You're sitting with the shell that used to contain them. They are no longer there, and yet at the same time they are with you all the time. But there's things we can do to get stuck. And our friends and acquaintances can enable our getting stuck. And while meaning to help us, actually harm us. If you lose a loved one or a friend, or if you contract a serious illness, or lose a job, or somebody leaves you, and you're surrounded by people who continue to tell you how terrible that is. Now, you may need to hear that in the early stages, but I'm talking months and years later. It was terrible that Betty left you. She's a real biatch, you know. It was tragic that the doctors made a mistake that cost you your loved one. You should be angry about that. That shouldn't have happened. All these things are ways of creating denial. You know, grieving is coming to grips with the truth that we've had a loss and looking at how we might move forward in light of the loss. It isn't continuing to remain angry about that it happened. That's a part of it. You know, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, in her excellent work around death and dying, has said denial is a part of it. It didn't happen, they're not really gone. Then as we start to realize it did really happen, we get angry. But if our friends are encouraging us to remain angry, that doctor screwed up, that judge made the wrong decision, she cheated on you and she never should have, she was never any good for you, and never help us move to the point where we look at what comes next, then we can become stuck with their help in a very unhealthy place. Our life effectively ends with the loss because we never start to look at what might be next. Life is full of things good and bad. It's part of the ride. And if you find yourself or if you find people around you asking themselves why it is God allowed this to happen, you're asking the wrong question. God is not the cosmic rescuer swooping down to rescue us from living life. Our God is a God of compassion and suffering, who stands with us in our loss, commiserates with us in our suffering, and wants us to return to fullness of life. You can't do that while you're stuck in the grief process. So I beg you, please, if you lose someone this year, or experience some other significant loss, and you find that you're just not able to grieve the loss for whatever reason, you find that you're struggling coming to terms with it, or a year goes by and you still find yourself denying that it happened or enraged about it, please contact a healthcare professional, a mental health professional, or a local clergy person who's trained in helping people deal with grief. There's no need for a loss to mean that your life ends. You can make that choice, but it's never a healthy one. And it's never one that coincides with living into the fullness of the people that we all were created to be. And if you find yourself in that place and don't know who to turn to, you certainly can contact me. Until next time, I'm Bishop Craig Bergland, wishing you God's rich blessing and peace. And namaste.